Madam President, on behalf of the Honorary Degree Committee of the University faculty, I present Scott Cowan as a candidate for the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa. As the president of Tulane University, Scott Cowan was responsible for ensuring the safe evacuation of students, staff, and faculty as Hurricane Katrina approached in August of 2005. As harrowing as those initial days were, he faced an even greater challenge in ensuring the very survival of the institution in the weeks and months that followed. 5 years later, Tulane received 44,000 applications for the class of 2014. Scott Cowan had been named one of Time Magazine's top 10 college presidents, and the city's newspaper, Times-Picayune, had named Cowan the 2010 winner of the Loving Cup, honoring him for his civic contributions to New Orleans revival.
Scott Cowan, for your wise and courageous leadership, and on the recommendation of the university faculty and vote of the Board of Trustees, it is my pleasure to admit you to the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges pertaining thereto, to bestow upon you the hood of this university and to grant you this diploma. Now, Scott's work is not done today. Before Scott gained national acclaim for his extraordinary work at Tulane, he spent nearly a quarter century at Case Western Reserve, including 14 years as Dean of the Weatherhead School of Management. During that time, he worked with faculty to transform the school's MBA program, drawing national acclaim and dramatically increasing applications. Scott is best known nationally for taking the steps necessary to keep Tulane viable after Hurricane Katrina put the majority of the campus, both of its campuses, underwater. Yet it is his actions after the immediate crisis, specifically his wholehearted embrace of the connection between the city and the university, that helped both to thrive. He has taken a leading role in reviewing the school system, in redeveloping the parish, and in promoting New Orleans to politicians and CEOs across the country. Decades ago, Scott helped ensure that the students at the Weatherhead School learned about the essential elements of effective leadership. Today, his work at Tulane is cited as a prime example of that model. In Scott Cowan, people find compassion and candor, common sense, and an unyielding commitment to advancing the community. It is my great honor to present Scott Cowan, our 2011 commencement speaker, to all of you this morning.
Good morning to the graduating class of 2011, and good morning to everyone in the audience and online here to celebrate the accomplishments of these extraordinary students. It is truly a pleasure and an honor for me to be back at Case Western Reserve University, where I spent 23 years as a professor and dean of the Weatherhead School of Management. When President Snyder asked me to speak today, I was absolutely delighted to do so. But since we are such good friends, she disclosed to me that some really famous person had originally been scheduled to speak today. However, when circumstances beyond his control forced him to cancel, the Student Speaker Selection Committee had to reconvene to select a new speaker. As I understand it, by the way, the final selection process was quite competitive and fiercely debated in discussing the candidates back and forth. And in the end, the choice came down to me and one other person. President Snyder called me and she said, "I'm so excited to tell you that you won the vote, but it was close." And I said to her, "Wow, I am truly thrilled. I am honored. But out of curiosity, who was the other choice?" She whispered, "LeBron James." But with all due respect to any other possible speakers, I do believe I have more in common with the graduates than most. First, we are all receiving our degrees from CWRU today. For most of you, it probably took 4 to 8 years to earn your degree. In contrast, it actually took me 36 years. Obviously, you were much faster in meeting the academic standards of this university than I was. Then again, there may be 1 or 2 of you in the audience who was also on the 36-year plan. Or even worse, many of your parents think you were on the 36-year plan. Another thing we have in common is that we both have experienced the emotional highs and lows of living in Cleveland. Most of our highs and lows are associated with the success or lack thereof of the Browns, the Cavaliers, and the Indians. Despite their records, we all love them and believe each new season will be the big one. I just hope the big one happens before I have the big one and pass from this earth. But my motto is never give up. I live in New Orleans now, home of the Who Dat Nation and the New Orleans Saints, formerly known as the Aints, a team that made for many years losing an art form. And yet now, people there still celebrate the victory against the Colts in the 2010 Super Bowl. So it can happen. And right now, the Cleveland Indians have their best shot at the big one. Go Indians. CWRU in Cleveland have shaped your life as it has mine. In my case, it also prepared me to confront challenges I could never have imagined. It is this topic, how to cope with a challenge that either destroys you or makes you stronger, that I want to discuss for just a few minutes. For me, that test came on August 29th, 2005. Katrina's impact on the New Orleans area was horrific and unprecedented. More than 1,800 people died. Most died in the floodwaters or asphyxiation. 200,000 homes were destroyed. Over 400,000 people lost their jobs. And 80% of the parish's landmass was flooded for 57 days. And by the way, 80% of the landmass of New Orleans is equal to 7 times the size of Manhattan. When we finally cleaned up New Orleans, months after the storm, the amount of debris we took out of New Orleans was 4 times what they took out of New York City after 9/11. The population of New Orleans that was 460,000 before the storm was 10,000 within 2 weeks after the storm, the largest diaspora in the history of the United States. And we lost basic services that anyone would expect from their city and their state for weeks and for months. The storm caused $650 million worth of damage to Tulane. Our health sciences campus, including our hospital, was flooded with an average of 3 feet of water for weeks. And 2/3 of our main campus also sustained significant flood damage, including 84 buildings. We became the first major university in the United States to close for an entire semester since the Civil War. Most people thought we would never recover, and if we did, we could never regain our stature and reputation. In time, we proved all the naysayers wrong. I told you the facts or the impact of Hurricane Katrina. What I haven't told you is how I felt about it. It's something I don't talk about very often in public because it's too painful. It's too personal. But I ask you this, have you ever been in a situation where one day your life is fine and the next day it is in chaos, where everything that gives you comfort and joy disappears into despair, hopelessness, and anxiety, that makes you feel like your heart is going to burst out of your chest and you will never be the same? This is what it felt like. As I stand before you today, 99% of me is with you, but 1% of me is with the Louisiana Cajun country, because as we speak, they are being flooded 3,000 square miles of floodwater coming from the Morganza spillover to protect New Orleans. 25,000 people will be disrupted because of this. 11,000 structures will be damaged, and the average floodwaters will be 25 feet. Yet I have to tell you, despite everything that happened to us 6 years ago, I've never been more optimistic about the future of New Orleans and Tulane. This optimism is not just wishful thinking. Rather, it is grounded in the well-documented progress we have made. What is the source of my optimism? What is my source of optimism for those in the Mississippi Delta, in Alabama, in Haiti? I have witnessed the resilience of people. I have seen the human spirit rise to levels that are unimaginable. And I have seen people who I thought could never recover do whatever it took to make sure that they were not destroyed. This is where my optimism comes from. As I reflect back on my Katrina experience, I learned a few lessons that may be helpful to the graduates as you leave the safe confines of campus and find your way in the world. The first lesson is hope is not a plan. Hope is not a plan. A tragedy the scope of what we have seen in New Orleans, Haiti, Japan, and now Alabama and Mississippi often overwhelms and paralyzes everyone affected by it, especially in the immediate aftermath. In the days and weeks after Katrina, people just hoped that someone, especially the government, would come in and make things better. The fact is, they did not. Hope is a wonderful thing, but it must be balanced with reality. Hope inspires us, while reality often overwhelms us, but it also grounds us. Yet a dose of both is needed to overcome what we face and to achieve what we dream. I know all the graduates in here have invested much hope in their dreams, but you will fulfill these dreams not by merely hoping they come true or counting on someone else to bring them about, but by committing yourself day in and day out to the realization. My second lesson is learn to face your fears. I was on the Tulane campus in New Orleans during the storm and for 5 days after. During that time, I existed on adrenaline and survival instincts. I, like everyone else, searched for food and water and stood guard around the clock with guns as looters roamed our neighborhoods. We had no power, no communications, no sewer, and no water supply. And that was for weeks. The temperature was in the high 90s, and it was matched by the humidity. For all intensive purposes, Tulane University in New Orleans did not exist, but in name only. I want to tell you about my story of evacuation, because it's been well told in America. It involved me and some of my colleagues siphoning gasoline out of cars that had been abandoned. It involved us taking a boat and rigging that boat so we could ride out of New Orleans where there was water. It took hot wiring a golf cart, commandeering a dump truck, driving to the edge of the Mississippi River, and hailing down a helicopter. That's how I left New Orleans. By the way, 2 weeks later, I was on the Today Show, and I believe it was Matt Lauer, and he asked me to recount my evacuation from New Orleans, and I told him the story. His first question was, I don't understand how a university president has these skills. And I said, Matt, there are two things I want you to know. I wasn't born a university president, but I was born and raised in New Jersey. Once I evacuated to Houston, Texas, and finally saw on TV the magnitude of the disaster, my fears immobilized me. I broke down in tears because I had no idea of what was going on in New Orleans. I only knew what was going on my patch of wet land where I was. I had no idea what to do. There was no book I could get out of any library to tell me what to do, and no one I could call. So I called the one person in my life who I trust more than any other, and it was my wife. I actually called her at 3 o'clock in the morning from a hotel room. And I told her I felt completely helpless. I didn't know what to do. And as she so often does, she asked me what I had done in the past when I found myself overwhelmed and afraid. And I said to her, first of all, I try to control what I can as opposed to what I cannot. I try to focus on the most important tasks that allow me to move forward while not being distracted with things that can wait for another day. Finally, I rely on those closest to me for support and guidance, knowing that we all need help at certain times. We ended the conversation by her telling me to stick to these tried and true methods to cope with what I feared. I asked the graduates, and I want you to be honest in your heart. Is there any graduate sitting here today who can claim to have absolutely no fear of the future? I suspect not. It is normal to be overwhelmed and afraid in the face of uncertainty, which many of you are facing. But once you realize that this is normal, self-doubt becomes secondary and problem-solving becomes primary, which leads me to my third lesson. Know what your end goal is. As you work through any seemingly impossible situation, it is always wise to determine the end goal you are trying to achieve. For us, the ultimate goal was renewal, a total re-envisioning of what the university and city could be in the future. In the immediate aftermath of any disaster, personal or otherwise, the initial priorities are survival and recovery. Yet these are not enough. As we, as survivors, have an obligation to those who suffered and sacrificed so much to learn from what transpired, to renew ourselves, and to help others in need as others have assisted us. This is why my university is so actively involved, not only in New Orleans, but around the world. You too have a responsibility. You are all privileged. You are not privileged because you came from great wealth. You are not privileged because you had an easy life. But you are privileged because you graduated from one of the finest universities in the world. And with that privilege comes responsibilities. Because your success is also the result of the sacrifices made by others who instilled in you the value of learning and the means to achieve your dreams. Your responsibility is to go forward, to reach out to others in need so you can do for them what others have done for you. Every fall convocation, I remind entering students that when people pass from this earth, they are never remembered for what they did for themselves. They are only remembered for what they did for others. There is one final lesson I learned during Katrina, and you've heard this before, but it bears repeating. We are each defined more by how we handle adversity and failure than we are by our successes. I wish all of you many successes and little to no adversity or failure in your lives. But the truth is, while you may not face a hurricane, you will have your own storms to survive. When that moment arrives, you must find your own path to renewal as we did. Defeat is not an option. Defeat is not an option. Renewal is the goal. In closing, let me share with you the first message I sent to the Tulane community after I was airlifted from New Orleans. Quote, "It is difficult to describe what the situation feels like. For those of us involved, it is surreal and unfathomable. Yet there is light at the end of the tunnel. Our focus is on the light and not on the darkness. 6 years later, we're still focused on the light. As I close, I would only ask one thing of all our graduates. Please, please, use your knowledge, your skills, your passion, and your degree to become engaged citizens and leaders of the world, and to help others find the light. If you do so, you will truly make a difference in the world. Congratulations to the graduating class of 2011.